त्रिपुरान्तकारी भानु शशि भूमिसुतो बुधस्य गुरुश्च शुक्र शनिराहुकेतु कुर्वन्तु कुर्वन्तु सर्वे मम सुप्रभातम्. Are you ready to start?
Namaste and welcome to this evening's program. Before we commence with the introductions and the welcome, we'd like to ask Kiranbhai to please do the prayer, opening prayer, and a bhajan or dhoon as the fitting start to a program such as this. Thank you.
वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव शुभकार्येषु सर्वदा. गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन. शंकर सुवन भवानी नंदन, शंकर सुवन भवानी नंदन, तेज प्रताप महाजगवंदन, तेज प्रताप महाजगवंदन. गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन. सिद्धि सदन गज बदन विनायक, सिद्धि सदन गज बदन विनायक, कृपा सिंधु सुंदर सबलायक, कृपा सिंधु सुंदर सबलायक. मांगत तुलसी दास कर जोड़, बस ही राम सी मानस मोह, बस ही राम सी मानस मोह. गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन, गाइए गणपति जगवंदन. ओम गणेशाय नमः.
Kiranbhai, for the wonderful rendition as always. Our salutations and prostrations to Bhagwan Sri Lakshmi Narayan, through whose grace all this was made possible. Namaste and welcome to this evening's program. Shree Mukeshbhai Bhavan, Shree Jedabhai Shukla, devotees both present and those watching online. We are really happy that you've made the time to be part of this very first of a series of talks. Before I introduce Mukeshbhai, I'd just like to give you a slight perspective of these talks. As you're all well aware, this year the Lakshminarayan Mandir and the Ramakrishna Vedanta Society celebrates its 50th anniversary. No small milestone this. And as part of the entire year's programs, part of it is this series of talks which we call Celebrating Vedanta. Our revered and loved priest Sri Jedabhai had come up with the right theme for the 50th anniversary, which is Darmo, Rakshati, Rakshitah. Simply translated, it means those who uphold and protect Dharma are protected and upheld by the Dharma. So all the series of speakers that will be speaking on this theme, but exploring it from all various facets of this vast scope of Vedanta. Mukeshbhai Bhavan is an engineer by qualification. In his earlier days, he occupied some very senior positions, very high up in the corporate environment. He had become the vice president of the Industrial Development Corporation. He held a senior position in Anglo-American at one stage. Since he has become the leader of the School of Practical Philosophy, he has given up those because of the responsibility that comes with that position. The School of Practical Philosophy follows the system of Advaita Vedanta. So Mukeshbhai is really well versed in the aspect of Vedanta. He is a really, from childhood, a great scholar of the Srimad-Bhagavatam and the Mahabharata, and has done intensive study and reflection of it. And part of today's talk, I'm sure, will refer to those two great scriptures and tie up the theme of Dharmo, Rakshati, Rakshitah. So we're most delighted to have Mukeshbhai to start off this series of talks, and we hope that you do enjoy them all. So without further ado, I now hand over to Mukeshbhai. I'd like to, before we hand over to him, call Sri Jedabhai to please do the tilak for Mukeshbhai.
Gentlemen, I begin by offering obeisance to the deities of the temple, Sri Lakshminarayan Bhagavan, and I offer obeisance to Sri Jedabhai Shukla. I'd like to conduct this talk standing up, if that's okay, so I'll come and stand at the podium. It's also good for the health to stand for long periods of time. So the temple celebrates its 50th anniversary with the theme Darmo Rakshati, Dharma Rakshatiha. So, having offered my obeisance to the presiding deity, Sri Lakshminarayan Bhagwan, I'd like to speak about Sri Jayadevbhai Shukla next. Sri Nearby, I had sent you a WhatsApp, so I need to ask you something. You can whisper in my ear. Okay, I got the info. Sri Jayadevbhai ji, यह मंदिर 50 साल से अस्तित्व में है। यहाँ पे आप 20 साल से अधिक विराजमान है। आपने धर्म का विस्तार रूप से प्रचार और प्रसार करते हुए धर्म की रक्षा गंभीरता से और स्थिर तौर से की है। जब कई कठिनाई आई, व्यक्तिगत या अन्य, आपने आपका कर्तव्य श्रद्धापूर्वक, भक्तिभावपूर्वक, प्रेमपूर्वक से किया है। इस सब कार्य जो सेवा आपने भगवान लक्ष्मी नारायण के प्रति अर्पण की है, समस्त समाज को इस सेवा का लाभ प्राप्त हुआ है। धर्मो रक्षति, धर्म रक्षितः रक्षतिः, ये केवल आपकी मान्यता ही नहीं बल्कि आपकी स्वाभाविक पुरुषार्थ मर्यादा भी है। समस्त समाज की ओर से आपके प्रति मैं कृतज्ञता व्यक्त करता हूँ और साथ साथ समस्त समाज की ओर से आपके प्रति प्रणाम। Ladies and gentlemen, this evening the intention is to speak as follows. Firstly, on the word Dharma, and then where do we find Dharma in the current age, and the grace that prevails for us to find the Dharma in the current age, and then to share a story that portrays an aspect of Dharma being upheld, and lastly, to inspire you to delve into the source in which we can find how Dharma is upheld. So the first part, the word Dharma. It's often loosely translated as religion, or duty, or decorum, or custom. What I would like to do is I would like us to be very open to what the word Dharma means, and to stay with the Sanskrit word Dharma, and not to put it into any particular English word, because that would then limit it. So if you consider the word Dharma, in Sanskrit our words have the etymology starting from what we call a dhatu, which is a seed form or a root form. And the dhatu for Dharma comes from dri. And in Sanskrit, you discover the meaning of the word in its locative, which is usually verbal. So in doing something, in understanding something, you get to know what the word means. So the word dri, which is the dhatu for dharma, the dhatu patha says it's in dharana that you will understand it or get its meaning. And dharana means that which is being held, that which is supported, that which one bears. So that's the etymology, the first part of the word, the dhatu of the word dharma, dri, that which is being in upholding, in supporting, in bearing. After the dhatu, you put an affix to the word, so you fix something to it. And in Sanskrit, that affix is called pratyaya. So the pratyaya that follows from dri, it's quite a series of grammatical steps that you have to follow from man, and it ends with ma. And furthermore, it also tells us that that affix is a krit affix, and it's instrumental. So what that means is that the word dharma, that which is being upheld, that which is being supported, that which you bear, it's almost as if it's a verb sort of a connotation, and it's something that it's put into action. It's an instrumental type of a word. So it's something that is put into action. So that is why I say if we can be open to what the word dharma means. If we're just going to say religion, then it could be something out there, and it's a noun, and it's static. But let's be open to the verbal aspect of it. And why? Because we are all practicing dharma. We are all bearing something, upholding something, supporting something. And the question is, what is it that we are upholding, bearing, or supporting? So consider it this way. Every morning when you get up, what is it that you're upholding, that you're supporting, that you're bearing? The manner in which you get up, whether it's lethargic or enthusiastic, tells you something about the inner qualities towards life that you're bearing, upholding, supporting. The way you greet your spouse, the way you greet and exchange interaction with the children, the way you dress for the day, the way you go to work, and the way you engage with the work, your attitude towards the work, all of it is a reflection of what you're actually upholding, bearing, or supporting. Do we get a sense of that? So that's the broader meaning of the word dharma. And if you can stay with that etymological derivation of it and let it open up to what it actually means in practice. So by now, I hope you're thinking in your mind what is it that I am upholding, what I am bearing, what I am supporting all day. From the time when my eyes open up to the time I put my feet on the floor, something is being upheld. The question is, to what standard? Now, if you feel that dharma that you're intrinsically practicing, the standards need to be lifted up, where do we find it? So that concludes the first part of the talk, the understanding of the word dharma. Now we move to the second part. Where can we find it? So here, I will be speaking about the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Now the Srimad-Bhagavatam is different to the Bhagavad Gita, and please pardon my presumption in assuming that you don't know the difference. We once started a Srimad-Bhagavatam class and told people to come with copies, and half of them came with a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, not the Srimad-Bhagavatam. So it's from experience, I'm just drawing the distinction. So I'll say more about the Srimad-Bhagavatam. But the Srimad-Bhagavatam, it's full of grace. And let's look at the second verse of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. The first verse in the opening chapter, gives a description of the reality of the ultimate cause of things. It starts off with janama, dasya, yato, anvaya, iti, rascha, and so forth. And in my view, that verse is not translatable. It has to be discovered. And the entire Srimad-Bhagavatam, in my view, is a journey of discovering what that reality is that's described in the first verse. I'll be happy to say also that in this age, when we're talking about things that needs to be politically correct, etc., it says janama dasya, and the ending, the dasya, the asya ending, is gender neutral. So it's not he from whom, it's not she from whom, but that from whom. So God is neutral, gender neutral. It's not he from whom, it's gender neutral, all right? But the reality is there. But what I'd like to speak about is the second verse, because it's about dharma, and where can we find it, and how is it related to the Srimad-Bhagavatam. So here I'll hand over to Harini Ben to recite the second verse for us. Harini Ben?
Dharma prochita kaitavotra paramo nirmat saranan satam vedyam vastavamatra vastu shivadan tapatrayon मूलनम् श्रीमद्-भागवते महामुनिकृते किं वा परैरीश्वर सत्यो ह्रीत्य वरुध्यतेऽत्र कृतिभिः शुश्रूषुभिस्तत्क्षणात् शुश्रूषुभिस्तत्क्षणात्.
This second verse, remember, every morning you get up, you're upholding something. And the question is what? So the second verse starts with the words, Darmo projita kaitavya. It says, that Dharma that you're upholding, which is superficial or weak in any way, put it aside. How's that? Okay? So I'm all in for it. Because every morning I get up, gosh, what I'm upholding, there's a lot that needs to be closed in that. So it starts off with the word Dharma projita kaitavya. Whatever it is that Dharma, whatever it is that you're upholding, and it's false or superficial, put it aside. Straight away it's telling you that, okay? Put it aside. So are you keen to hear what next, or do you think this doesn't apply to you? Then it says, herein, so I've got a copy here for show, herein, in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, is the highest, which is of 100-fold purity. That's what the word means. Dharma projita kaitavya atra paro nirmit saranam sarasata. Right? So herein, put aside the dharma that you're upholding that is false. Herein is the highest of 100-fold purity. So in other words, it's implying that herein is a dharma that is of 100-fold purity. Then it goes on to say, it's understandable, knowable, and herein is the substance that is auspicious, and it can uproot the threefold agonies that a person suffer. How's that? Sounds enticing? Now we're just halfway through the verse. The rest of it goes to say, having been produced by the Mahamuni, referring to sage Vyasa, put aside everything else, because, I'll go to the end of the verse, being desirous to hear what's in here without delay, the Lord will instantaneously be encircled and enclosed in your heart. How's that? Powerful, right? So that's that second verse. So put aside whatever dharma that's superficial. Herein is the highest of 100-fold purity, compiled by the great sage Sri Vyasa, knowable, understandable, of the substance of auspiciousness, removing the threefold agonies suffered by man, and those that are desirous of wanting to hear this without fail, the Lord will be encircled, contained within the heart. So that's verse 2. It's so beautiful. Let's hear that once again, Harini Ben.
श्रीमद्भागवते महामुनिकृते किं वा परैरीश्वर सद्यो हृद्यवरुध्यते त्रिकृतिभिः शुश्रूषुभिस्तच्छणात् शुश्रूषुभिस्तच्छणात् शुश्रूषुभिस्तच्छणात्.
Thank you. So the last words that kritibi sushrushu dakshanat is desirable, be wanting to hear this without delay, the dakshanat. So let's consider now the Srimad-Bhagavatam, because there's a lot prophesied in this verse about putting aside Dharma that's superficial, because herein is the highest and the purest. So what is in it and who's behind it that such a statement can be made, that herein is the purest and of 100-fold purity? It's been written by the sage Vyasa. And the sage Vyasa was 16th or the 17th partial incarnation of Mahavishnu. He had the power to see fully into the past, know everything that's happening in the present, and could see fully into the future as well. So he saw the Kaliyuga coming. So this is the Kaliyuga that we are in. And he knew that in the Kaliyuga, the level of consciousness will be declining, human beings' lifespan will be declining, their health, vigor, strength, and everything will be declining. And so for the benefit of humanity in this age of Kali Yuga, he took the Veda and he split it into 4. Now, I'm sure we can say, how many of us have read the Veda? So he probably knew this was going to happen. Then he took the Veda and he further divided it into the Upanishads. And he probably realized, well, it's actually going to be the Kali Yuga. Maybe people will struggle to read the Upanishads as well. So then he created all the Puranas. And the last of the Purana that he created was the Mahabharata, which is more than 100,000 verses. Now, I'll be speaking about that tomorrow, if the Mandit will still have me after tonight's talk. So the last that he compiled was the Mahabharata. So look at this. He saw the decline coming in the Kali Yuga, with a degeneration of consciousness. So for the benefit of helping humanity cross the ocean of samsara, he divided the Vedas into 4. He created the Upanishads, the Puranas, the last of which is the Mahabharata. But now he is sitting in despair because he feels something is missing. Well, he doesn't know what's missing. He just feels he's set in despair. Now imagine after having done all that, he's feeling this despair. Then comes, in my view, one of the greatest interventions for us, one of the greatest interventions that could have happened in history. While he is sitting in despair, the sage Narada appears. Now, let's consider why this is significant. I'm going to go a bit forward into the story of Narada, which he explains to Vyasa Muni later on. So Sri Narada Muni grew up as a young boy in an ashram, and when his mother passed away, he walked away from the ashram, reflecting on God, on the Absolute. And so deep was he involved in love for God that he had a vision of God. But the vision spoke to him and said, in this lifetime, you're not fit to see me fully because you've still got residual karma. But in the next time, you'll have direct communion with me all the time. So Sri Narada Muni spends the rest of his life singing hymns on Narayana, and when the last of his karma is finished, he passes away. And when he passes away, he merges one with the Absolute. And when the entire creation is dissolved after 1,000 days of Brahma, which is 3.6 billion years, he dissolves with it. And he remembers all of this when the entire creation dissolves. And when the creation comes forth again, he emerges with it as well. So here's a divinity that knows what's happened when the creation is dissolved and is present with the creation when it's come forth as well. So this is the divinity that visits Sri Vyasa in his moment of despair. So Sri Vyasa receives him with full honor, and then he tells him that you've had communion with, you are one with the Absolute, so you have infinite knowledge. And he says, you've got direct communion with the Absolute all the time, so you also know the most subtle of knowledge. And not only that, you have the ability to permeate everywhere like the air. So, Sri Narad Muni, go into my heart and tell me what is it that is giving me this despair. So can you see the intervention now? Sri Vyasa Muni had compiled all of this for our benefit in the Kaliyuga, to help us cross this ocean of samsara where consciousness is degenerating. He's done all the work, but he's not satisfied. And you have this intervention by Narad Muni. Now, he's a celestial Sri Devrishi Narad Muni because he's got direct communion with the Absolute all the time. And also look at the time span from the dissolution of the creation, and it's emitting forth as well. So when Sri Vyasa Muni asks him this question, the answer from Sri Narad Muni is direct. And it's quite hard-hitting. He says, you have not adequately described the glories of the Absolute. But it's hard-hitting. He says, knowledge, no matter how pure, does not shine with brilliance if it is devoid of bhakti, devotion to the Absolute. It's a quite hard-hitting statement. So knowledge, no matter how pure, does not shine with dazzling brilliance if it is devoid of bhakti, devotion to the Absolute. So it's quite a long dialogue, but he says, go into consciousness, Vyasa Muni, and recount all the incarnations of the Absolute and bring them forth, so that in the age of Kaliyuga, when people read these narratives of the incarnation of the Absolute, their hearts will be filled with bhakti, and they will feel the presence of the Absolute in their very heart. So that's the intervention from Sri Narad Muni to Vyasa Muni. So Sri Narad Muni then leaves, Sri Vyasa Muni sits into samadhi, and he brings forth, through his power of consciousness, he recounts all the incarnations of the Absolute, and he brings forth what we now know as the Srimad-Bhagavatam. He teaches it to his son, Sri Shukdevji, and who then imparts it to Arjun's grandson, Parikshit, which we'll speak about later on. So that verse that tells us, that Harini sang so beautifully, put aside all dharma that's superficial. So remember, whatever you're holding up in the morning, every day that you're holding up some standard, put it aside if it's lacking, because herein lies the highest and the purest. Can you see why? Because it's got the grace of Sri Narad Muni, and it's got the grace of Sri Vyasa Muni in it. So, if we need to understand what is the Dharma that we need to uphold, we need to study the Srimad-Bhagavatam, because it says very clearly in the second verse, put aside whatever Dharma that you're upholding, whatever it is that you're upholding that's superficial, herein lies the highest. So that concludes the second part of the talk, right? So we're doing good so far. The first was the definition of Dharma. The second was, where do we find Dharma? And now it's in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. So I'm going to go straight into book. The Srimad-Bhagavatam is 12 books. I'm going to go straight into book number 7. and share a story to demonstrate how we can learn about Dharma through the lives of great beings, and why it's implied that the highest and the purest lies here. So the story that I'll speak about is Prahlad. Famous story of Bhakta Prahlad. He's one of the few names that Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita. So the story of Bhakta Prahlad is as follows. His father was antagonistic towards Vishnu because Vishnu killed his elder brother or younger brother, I cannot remember, Hiranyaksha, and Prahlad's father's name was Hiranyakashipu. So he performed austerities for a long time, and the most severe of austerities. And as a result, he gets this boon, and he governs and he rules over the entire world and the 3 other lokas as well, all the way up to Indra's heaven. So he becomes the ruler. And in his rule, nobody is to worship Vishnu or Sri Hari. So he has a son born, and his son's name is Prahlad. So when Prahlad was about 5 years old, he sends him to the teacher, and the teachers are to teach him everything except devotion to Vishnu. So after some months, the teacher brings him home, and Hiranyakashipu, the father, puts Prahlad on his lap and says, "What did you learn?" And Prahlad says, "Well, the mightiest of being is Sri Hari, Sri Vishnu, and we should all surrender ourselves to Sri Hari, Sri Vishnu." So Hiranyakashipu laughs. He says, "Ha ha ha ha, somebody is teaching him false." He tells his teacher, "There may be some unwanted people there in your ashram, so just keep Prahlad secluded and make sure he doesn't hear anything about Sri Vishnu or Sri Hari." So off he goes again to the teacher's house, and he spends some time there. And they teach him everything, artha, kama, dharma, artha, kama, except moksha, because it got nothing to do with Sri Vishnu or Sri Hari. And a few months later, they dress him up, and they bring him to the king, his father, Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu puts Prahlad on his lap and says, "Son, what did you hear?" At this point, humanity receives a beautiful statement from the 5-year-old Sri Prahlad. Now let's hear what humanity receives at this point. Harini Ben?
Shravanam kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam padasevanam Archanam vandanam dasyam Sakhyam atmanivedanam.
Thank you, Harini Ben. That's beautiful. So far, remember, Prahlad is upholding Dharma. He's upholding his, let's say, devotion to Sri Vishnu. And when his father puts him on the lap, his father says, "What did you learn?" This is what he tells him. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is the famous 9 steps on the way of devotion. And they are, let's hear it again, Harini Ben, it is so beautiful. So these are the 9 steps on the way of devotion, on the way of bhakti.
Shravanam kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam padasevanam Archanam vandanam dasyam Sakhyam atmanivedanam.
So I'll go over these very briefly, and I just want to say what I'm sharing with you, I'm paraphrasing as the words of Maha Jagadguru, Brahmalin Shankaracharya, Swami Shantananda Saraswati of Jyotirmath, he has had a great influence on the school of practical philosophy, on our understanding of Advaita. So Shravanam is to hear about the greatness of the Absolute. And the way the Shankaracharya put it is that we feel small relative to the entire creation, not so. I mean, you really feel small in relation to the creation. But if you hear of something great, if you know there's something great, you'd like to hear more about it. So let's move away from the spiritual world. I'm doing a lot of work on finance at the moment, and I'd like to become extremely rich. I'd like to be the richest man in the world. And I heard of Warren Buffett and his purity of investments. I'd like to hear more about him. So do you get a sense of it? Good. So in the spiritual side, the same thing. There's something that you may realize is far bigger than yourself, and you'd like to hear more about it. Now that which is far bigger than ourselves, we put a name to it. It's a name that is Bhagavan. Anybody heard that? Hey Bhagavan, okay, all right. So the word Bhagavan, there are various sources to what it means. There's in Vishnu Purana, and I think Vyas Muni's father, Sri Parashara, has also given a definition in another Upanishad, the memory slips me. But it's made of the word Bhaga, Bhag, and Ga. And the Van is the possessor of it. So we say Vidyavan. Anilbai is Vidyavan. Vidya is knowledge, one who possesses the knowledge. Ramesh Bhima is Balwan. Bala is strength, so he's the one, the possessor of the strength. So Bhagavan is the possessor of the Bhaga, and the Bhaga has got 6 qualities. It's, I can remember the Sanskrit, is Ashraya, so that's glory. Ashraya, Shree, which is the splendor, the radiance, and Yashas, which is, it's Ashraya, which is the glory, Virya, strength, power, Yashas, fame. Then the other 3, let me just see if it comes to me. Yes, it's Shree, which is this illustriousness, this radiance, the splendor, Jnana, knowledge, and Tyaga, renunciation. So that which is the absolute possessor of all of those 3, the Bhaga, the possessor of all of that is Bhagavan. So if we feel small in relation to this bigness, which is Bhagavan, we'd like to hear more about Bhagavan, you see? So that's the first step, the Shravanam. And hearing more about Bhagavan, so if you have a hero that you aspire to, and you hear more about the hero, you'll keep praising that hero, not so? So the next is Kirtanam, to sing praises of the Absolute. So after hearing of the Absolute and singing praises of the Absolute is Smaranam, to bring it to memory. And the more things you bring to memory, the more that grows. So that's the first 3 steps, which is the first phase of the 9 steps of devotion. Then comes the next 3. The first is Archanam, which is worship. So worship of the Absolute, whatever we do, it should be a dedication to Bhagavan. Then comes Vandanam, that's also a form of praise, but in the form of stotra and hymns, that's Vandanam. And then we have Pada Sevanam, which is to serve at the feet of the Absolute, of Bhagavan. So here, whatever activity we do, we can consider it as a service to Bhagavan, as a service to Absolute. Then come the next 3. It's seva, so here it's the service aspect. Just remind me, Harini, when just sing that verse again. I just want to make sure of that, the third last word.
Shravanam kirtanam Vishnu smaranam padasevanam archanam vandanam dasyam sakyam atma nivedanam.
Thank you. Then you move to dasyam, so you become a servant of the Lord. So every activity that you do is but you an instrument of Bhagavan. And then, having reached that stage, sakyam, you become like a friend of Bhagavan. And The last word, Hari Nivedanam, just give me the last one. Atma. Atma Nivedanam, where you become one with Bhagavan. So the Shankaracharya explains this well by giving an example of Hanuman. They asked Hanuman, what is your relationship with Rama? He says, in body, I am a servant of Rama. In mind and heart, I'm a friend of Rama. But in truth, I'm one with Rama. So that's those last 3 steps, you see. So these are the famous 9 steps on the way of devotion, 9 steps on the way of bhakti. So let's come back to the story. Hiranyakashipu, who's ruling over all 3 realms, and he's obliterated all understanding and knowledge of Sri Vishnu. He's got his son sitting on his lap, and he's asking his son, oh son, what did you hear? And his son gives him these 9 steps of the way of devotion. Hiranyakashipu is furious. What does it say? Kill this young boy straight away. He is absolutely furious. Kill him. So first they send the guards with spears and they try and kill him. There's no effect. Then he says, what? Bring those elephants, let them trample over him. They bring the wild elephants to trample over Prahlad. Nothing happens. He says, what? Take him on top of the tower and drop him down. They do that. Nothing happens. Now here, the narrator of the story was again Sri Narada Muni. He puts it beautifully. It's a lovely part of the phrase, and let me see if I can get it right. And all the words end in the Sanskrit locative in. So the words are Pare Bhagvatya Nirdashye. So, in the Supreme, which is not visible to the senses, in the Supreme that is not visible to the senses, then the next word is Bhagavatiya Akhila Atmani. So, in the Atman is this Akhila, full Bhagavan, that is not visible to the senses. So in the heart, in the Atman is this whole, complete Bhagavan that is supreme and invisible to the eye. Then it brings it to Prahlad, Yukta Atmani. He was in his Atma, he was in union with that Atman. Look at that, beautifully put, right? So that's so beautifully put by the narrator. So can you consider what Sri Prahlad is upholding? Sri Narada Muni says, so that Bhagavan, which is supreme and invisible to the senses, which is complete, whole, in the Atman, Prahlad is in union in the Atman. So he's one with that, you see? So look at what he's upholding. That is why they try and pierce him with the spears, nothing happens. They try and trample him with the elephants, nothing happens. They drop him from the tower and nothing happens. Because his Atman is in union with that Atman, in which the fullness of this Bhagavan resides, which is invisible to the eye. So let's hear a beautiful kirtan by Kiran Bhai.
Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo 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 Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Thank you, Kiran Bhai. So this is Bhakta Prahlad holding Bhagavan in his heart. Not only that, direct union with Bhagavan. His Atman, in his Atman is that union with that which is in the Atman of all. That's more or less a more closer translation of that verse. So his father tries all sorts of other things. They try and starve him. There's no effect. They try and poison him. There's no effect. They try and subject him to all the elements, the cold and heat. There's no effect. So let's anchor everything to the theme. Darmo Rakshati Rakshitah. He who upholds Dharma is protected by Dharma. See that? So that is what Bhakta Prahlad does. And that which is upholding is of the highest standard. Because once again, in his Atman, it's united with the Atman in which resides the fullness of God in its supreme, invisible to the senses. That's what he is upholding. So, his father is not giving up. His Foy, his aunt, had a special gift. She had a blanket which was fireproof. Her name was Holika. So they devised a plan to build a pyre of wood, and the aunt is to sit on that pile of wood with Prahlad in her lap, and she'll cover herself with that blanket, and they'll set light to the they'll set alight the fire, the wood, and in that process Prahlad will die and she'll survive. So they go about with that. Set up this pyre made of wood. Holika, the aunt, sits on it with a blanket, and Prahlad on the lap. They set it alight. Now, as it happens, a gust of wind comes, the blanket flies off from Holika onto Prahlad, and as the fire becomes more vicious, Holika dies and Prahlad survives. So he who upholds Dharma is protected by Dharma. So I'd just like to deviate from the story a bit and give some views. You see, this upholding of Dharma, I have to tread into something more modern now. It's the words of Socrates, the famous Greek philosopher. And in my view, the teachings of Socrates and Plato, they from divinity, it cannot be human. So what Socrates, he gives 4 virtues, and one of them is courage. The other 3 are temperance, wisdom, and justice. Now this is what he says about courage. Our idea of courage is to be strong in the face of adversity, etc. That's more bravery. What he says is that courage is that under no circumstances must that which you know to be false change. So I'll go through that again. Under no circumstances must that which you know which is false or untrue change. That's courage. So let me try and illustrate this. It may be far-fetched examples and you may not identify with them. Let's say you're filling in your tax returns, okay? Haha. And now you know that if you're going to declare this gift, you're going to have to pay taxes on it. So you don't declare the gift. You see what's happened? That's not courage. Your idea of that which is untrue has changed because it's okay, I'm going to have to pay taxes. Do we follow that? So that's what Socrates tells us is courage. Another example, it may be so far-fetched that you laugh. Let's say you're traveling on the highway from here to Johannesburg, and there's a portion on the road where you know that there's no speed traps, and the speed limit is 120 kilometers per hour. Now this may sound far. You know there's no speed traps, so you exceed the speed limit, all right, because you know there's no cameras. That's lack of courage. Because there's no speed traps, your idea of that which is untrue has shifted now that it's acceptable. You see that? So that's not courage. Do we get a sense of it? So courage is that which you know to be untrue. Under no circumstances must that view change, that this is not true. Do we see that? You must not even harbor it. So I'm going to give you an example of somebody who I know very closely and who has a factory where they make jerseys. So you may or you may not know who that person is. And it so happened that they were expecting a shipment of yarn from a container from overseas, and the container got unjustly put aside by the customs police for no reason. And he phoned some other people in the industry, and they said, you know what? They know that us in the fabric industry, how critical the shipment is. They're putting it aside because they're expecting a bribe, you see. Now, some unworthy individuals in the customs police know just how critical the delivery of these containers are to certain parts of the industry. And for every time that it's delayed, every day the cost just goes up by thousands of rands, you see. If you lack courage, in the Plato sense, you'll do the sums to say in 5 weeks it's going to cost me 30,000 rands or 100,000 rands. If I pay the bribe off, it's going to be okay, at least I'll have my container. Do you see that? So this is courage, that your view of that which is untrue must not change. So I had the good fortune of having just a casual chat with the person involved, and I was delighted to hear what he told me. And he said all that he knows is that to put the truth first. No other knowing was harbored, you see? No other knowing was harbored. If you're going to harbor, and if you're going to do the mathematics and the arithmetic, that each day is going to cost me this, the answers will already come to say, let me pay the bribe. Do we see that? So he didn't even harbor that aspect of knowing, not at all. Not at all. He didn't harbor it. He told me, and I was delighted to hear that, I'm just going to put the truth first. I need to get my container. There's nothing wrong with why it's being held up, and I'm going to follow that. The view of that which is untrue didn't change. He didn't even harbor the thought of what other people in the industry were doing, paying bribe and cutting the time off. So they refused to release the container, and the days went by and the costs started mounting up, and he escalated the matter to higher and higher sources, and eventually it reached a higher source, and they released the container. So you get a sense of that. Your view of that which is untrue must not change at any time. That's courage. So a few months go by, and again, his container is pulled off. Now, the first time it cost him a lot of money. He didn't harbor the thought again as to this is how much it cost. You get a sense of courage? Your view of that which is untrue must not change at any time. If it's untrue forever. And now when they pulled it aside, the custom officials kept it for a day or two. Then they realized, hey, it's that man again, he's not going to budge. and they release the container. He who upholds the truth, he who upholds Dharma is protected by Dharma. Do you get a sense of that? So why I digress, I don't think any of us are going to face a situation where our aunt is going to say, come sit on the fire, and our aunt is going to have a blanket and they're going to try and burn us. But this is the kind of situations that we'll face, you see? And this is where Dharma needs to be upheld. So Prahlad, at any point, because the fullness of this Bhagavan that is invisible was his Atman was in total unity with that. That which is untrue never came to his mind. What if they drop me from the tower? What if this? What if the elephants kill me? Nothing, it was not harbored. Do we see that? He who protects Dharma is protected by Dharma. So now, when the fire trick didn't work, his father is really furious. And his father calls Prahlad into the palace and says, and he takes out his sword and he says, I'm going to slay your head now. If there's this Vishnu that's everywhere, that's what Vishnu means, all-pervading. If it's everywhere, let's see if he can come and rescue you now. Now, there's two versions of the story about the pillar. I'll say it as it is in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And there's a lovely pillar in the palace, and he says, is there Vishnu here in this palace, Vishnu in this pillar? And he goes to the pillar, and he hits it with his fist. And if Vishnu, the all-pervading, is everywhere, can it be in this pillar? So now let's just pause the story here for a moment, and we'll just take two branches of it, you see? So Hiranyakashipu, when he performed this austerities to be ruler of all three worlds, Bur, Bhuva, Swar, he also asked for the boon that nobody from these three worlds must be able to kill me. I must not be killed by a man or one of the deities. I must not be killed by any man-made weapon or divine weapon. I must not be killed at sunrise. I must not be killed at sunset. And I must not be killed inside or outside. So he tried to tick off all of those, you see. Now let's just stop what's happening here. Thus far, Prahlad has upheld Dharma all the time, right? He hasn't deviated. Now such has been his upholding of Dharma that there's something great that happens now. So we're just pausing here at the pillar into two parts of the story. One is Hiranyakashipu and his boon, what he got, and the other is what's going to happen now. Now in this creative cycle, which is 1,000 years of Brahma, it's about 3.6 billion years. And in this 3.6 billion years, thus far, there's only been 22 times in which the absolute from this all-pervading consciousness has crystallized into a human form, which we call avatar. Only 22 times. And the 14th time that this has happened in this entire, we're halfway through the cycle, so we're 1.8 billion years into this part of the creative cycle. We are the 7th Manu avatar. What happened then, the protection was such that we then had the 14th avatar of this absolute. So these are the two things that happened. Remember, only 22 in entire 3.6 billion years. So how far apart they are? And the 14th one now takes place. So when Hiranyakashipu goes to the pillar, and he tells Prahlad, if Mahavishnu is all-pervading and in this pillar, let's see if he's going to protect you now. And he hits the pillar with his fist. And out of the pillar appears this incarnation. He who protects Dharma is protected by Dharma. Darmo Rakshati, Dharma Rakshatiha. What appears from the pillar is the incarnation known as the Nara Simha. Nara man, Simha lion. Narasimha avatar. It's half man, half lion. And I'll go through this very fast because I get emotional. It is so beautiful. He takes Hiranyakashipu, he grabs him, takes him to the entrance of the palace. It's dusk, it's neither day nor night. He puts him on his lap, so he's neither in the sky nor on earth, and with his claws, which is a weapon made neither by man or divinities, he rips his guts apart and he kills him. He who protects Dharma is protected by Dharma. Hiranyakashipu, he becomes one with the Absolute. He reaches moksha. This may sound strange, but it's a story for another day about the incarnations of Jaya and Vijaya from Vaikuntha. That's a story for another day. So Hiranyakashipu gets moksha, he is killed, and we have the Narasimha avatar. But this avatar is so fierce that all the gods that have come there and have sung hymns to Narasimha cannot be pacified. So Brahma tells Prahlad, please, you pacify this incarnation. And he then sings a hymn, which I think is in book 7, chapter 8 and 9. It's a beautiful hymn that he sings to Narasimha, pacifying him. So at this point, let's hear another kirtana, which is not the hymn that Prahlad sings, but we have had this incarnation, the 14th incarnation. Kiran Bhai?
Srimad-Narayan, Bhajman-Narayan, Srimad-Narayan, Bhajman-Narayan, Srimad-Narayan, Narayan, Narayan, Srimad-Narayan, Narayan, Narayan, Mata Narayan, Pita Narayan, Mata Narayan, Pita Narayan, Guru Narayan, 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 Guru Narayan, 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 Sriman Narayan, Bhajman Narayan, Sriman Narayan, 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 Brahma Narayan, Vishnu Narayan, Shiva Narayan, Shiva Narayan, 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 तुझ में नारायण, मुझ में नारायण, यहाँ नारायण, वहाँ नारायण, जहाँ देखूं मैं नारायण, सब में नारायण, सब में नारायण, 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 श्रीमन्नारायण, भजन नारायण, श्रीमन्नारायण, नारायण, नारायण, श्रीमन्नारायण, नारायण, नारायण.
Thank you, Kiran Bhai. So such was the devotion and such was Prahlad upholding Dharma that you had the Absolute that's permeating everywhere materialize into a form and protect he who was protecting Dharma. After Narasimha is specified, Prahlad in his hymn to Narasimha asks that everybody that is suffering in this ocean of samsara needs to be liberated as well. And Narasimha Avatar is very pleased with him and says, ask for any boon that you wish. And he says, I do not wish to ask for any boon because that will entrap me in the world again. And if there's a boon that you must grant me, it is that I don't have any desire at all. How's that? So he says, there is one thing though, if my father can be washed of all his sins, and there's an explanation then about why Hiranyakashipu is in fact liberated. That's a story for another day. So Prahlad goes on to rule the kingdom. The story then goes on much later to the Bali, his grandson, and the Vamana avatar, and thereafter Mahavishnu appears again, and in this instance Bhakta Prahlad is sent to Vaikuntha, the highest abode, the abode of the Absolute itself. So that is the story of Prahlad, and this brings us to conclusion of the third part of the talk that I had said. Remember, the first was the definition of Dharma. We need to be open to it. The second is where can Dharma be found? Srimad-Bhagavatam for the current age of the Kaliyuga, and I've given one story from that. So, what to do? We ought to be studying the Srimad-Bhagavatam because it has been written for the current age of the Kaliyuga. There's another story in there, which is again a story for another day, but I don't think the story should ever be repeated because a person should read the story. It's a story of Ajamil. And in that story, there's the god of death himself speaks. So anybody seen the movie Meet Joe Black? Okay, so that's the idea, the god of death, Yam Raja. He's explaining to his attendees that there's only 12 people that know fully the Bhagavata Dharma. 12 that know the Bhagavata Dharma. They are Brahma, the creator, his son Narada, Parameshvara, the 4 Kumaras, which are Sanat Kumar, Sanandana, Sanatana, I beg your pardon, Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanatana, and Sanat Kumar, Kapil Muni, Swayambhava Manu, the king Janaka, Prahlad, Bhishma, Bali, his grandson, Shuka, who narrates the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Shri Shukdevji, and the god of death, Yamraja. Those 12 know the Bhagavad Dharma fully. That's declared there. Now in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, what happens is, as we said, Vyasmuni recounts all the incarnations of the Absolute. And as you journey through all these incarnations, you meet episodes such as the one that I've discussed. And this one can say is the aspect of bhakti, shravanam, kirtanam. You hear it, you praise it, you bring it to memory. Now in doing so, this is what happens. And I'm coming back to the story of Prahlad because I'm just going to demonstrate what happens through this process. Prahlad explains this beautifully when, before his aunt tried to burn him, and when they tried to trample him, etc., with elephants, the teacher pulls Hiranyakashipu aside and say, you know what, he's still a young boy, give him time, as he'll grow up, he'll outgrow this affinity towards Vishnu. So they take him back to his teacher, and one day his teacher is not there. So all these boys says, listen, how come you know so much about Mahavishnu? And he gives the most beautiful sermon, book 5, chapter 6. And what he says, or is it 7? Well, I'm going to go through this because this is what the Srimad-Bhagavatam is about. This is what the upholding Dharma is about. And this is, in a way, the concluding part of what I have to share. I'll go through this slowly, and let's follow it step by step. This is what Prahlad says. He says the human embodiment is difficult to achieve. Everybody good so far? We'll go step by step. He says only in the human embodiment can you develop Dharma that is conducive to self-realization. All good so far? We'll take it slowly. Human embodiment is difficult to achieve. Only in the human embodiment can one develop Dharma that is conducive to liberation. So far, so good? Nobody lost yet. Then he says, the human embodiment is transient and it passes by very quickly. It's getting a bit serious, but everybody good? All right. And then he says 20 years of this human embodiment is spent in growing up, and another 20 years is spent in getting old. So we have to use the time in between while we're capable. Everybody good so far? All right. Nobody lost? And this time in between that we have, call it 40 years or whatever, half the time is spent sleeping. Fair? Okay. Everybody good so far? And the other time is spent awake. So we all okay so far, right? Nobody lost? Okay. And of the time that we spent awake, we engaged with family, we engaged with work, and we engage with the gratification of the senses. Fair enough? So what to do? I'm going slowly, okay? Then he says what needs to be done is that we have to appreciate the reality that exists. As a subject, it's the cause of everything, and as its object is that which is manifest into everything. That's good so far, right? So remember, we stopped this. The time that we awake, half the time we're sleeping, the time that we awake, we engaged with everything, family, vocation, gratification of the senses. But now he says this absolute reality, as the subject, it's the cause of everything, and as the object, it's the manifestation of everything. So far, so good? So coming back to the time that we awake, while we're engaging with family, while we're engaging with work, we have to see the cause in that which is manifest. Does that make sense? Everybody following so far? And this is where the devotion comes in, the 9 steps on the way of devotion. Because what the devotion does is, that which is creating a veil, where in all this there is manifest reason, we are not seeing the cause, it's because of the 2 forces in the creation, which is the rajas and the tamas. So to tamas, everything is clouded over. Through rajas, there's just no time to pause and see what's going on. And what this 9 steps of devotion does, this bhakti does, it generates the sattva in us, so that through the sattva, as the sattva arises, we begin to see the cause in the manifest things in us, in front of us, and we begin to appreciate that cause in us as well. Remember, the 9th step is becoming Atma, what's the word, Harini Ben? It's 9 steps of devotion, the last word, Atma Nivedanam. Thank you. So you become one with it. So this is what he's saying, of all the time that we are awake, to realize this absolute reality, which is the cause, is also in the manifest. It's also in the family and the things that you do. But you have to curb the mind from the sense gratifications, etc. You have to curb the rajas and tamas. And in doing so, he also goes into the process, and I'll just say this for my fellow philosophers that may be watching this through YouTube, through the process of vyati rekha anvaya, that everything that you see initially is not real until you get to the reality, then you see the reality in it all. That's the anvaya. And when this is brought about, you begin to see that the highest that there is not only shining in your heart, but is shining in all the hearts as well. Beautifully explained by him, isn't it? So I hope you could follow that. Beautiful, beautiful. That's just an example of all the episodes that lie in the Srimad-Bhagavatam. So all the 23 Leela avatars that are there, you journey through all of them. And as you journey through all of them, you're hearing them, you're praising it. There's a memory of it, and it works in the being. So then during this time that we are awake, and as we study the Srimad-Bhagavatam, you begin to see deeper into things that are in front of you. Now that's an aspect of upholding Dharma. So we come back to where we started. Every morning we get up, The Dharma is that which you're upholding, which you're bearing, which you're supporting. So you're doing something, right? The way that you're getting up, the way that you're speaking to your spouse, the way you're dressing, something is being upheld. What is the standard? To raise that standard, let's hear the glories of the Absolute as put into the Srimad-Bhagavatam, and slowly, slowly our hearts and minds and consciousness will rise to that. And then that which we are upholding will be of a different order, and so will the protection that is bestowed be of a different order. So ladies and gentlemen, with that I conclude what I would like to have shared this evening. And in conclusion, I'd also just thank you all for hearing and the really absolutely heartwarming, touching accompaniment that we had. There's just one more thing I realized I had to say, sorry, about the Srimad-Bhagavatam. You see, the second verse said, put aside all the Dharma that is false. Because herein lies that of a purity of 100-fold. And you can get a sense of that by Bhakta Prahlad. The next verse, oh, it is so beautiful. The next verse, let's hear that from Harini Ben, and we'll close the session with that.
Nikama kalpataror galitam phalam shukamukhadamritadrava sanyutam pibat bhagavatam rasmalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavuka.
Thank you. So the Srimad-Bhagavatam was, Vyas Muni compiled it. His son Sri Shukdevji imparted it to Parikshit, Arjun's grandson. So we hear it through Shukdevji. And what this third verse is telling us is that from this wish-yielding tree, so in the Vedic literature, there's a beautiful concept called Kalpa Vriksha, a tree that grants all your desires. So from this Vedic tree that grants desires, referring to the Srimad-Bhagavatam, that had flowed this nectar that has flowed out. From this wish-yielding tree, this ripe fruit is oozing out, referring to the Srimad-Bhagavatam. It's oozing out from the mouth of Sri Shuka, which is full of nectar, immortal nectar. Continue drinking from the stream. So beautifully put. Continue drinking from this stream and become yourselves connoisseurs of auspiciousness. That's the third verse. So with that, we conclude this. Thank you very much. I'd just like to address Jaidev Bhai once again. Jaidev Bhai, इस प्रवचन में कई न कई भूल तो हो ही चुकी है. यह भूल आप मेरे अज्ञानता समझकर कृपया माफ कीजिए. धन्यवाद और आपको फिर से प्रणाम. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, Niva.
Thank you, Mukeshbhai, for such a inspiring, thought-provoking talk. Please, to all those present physically, all those who are viewing this online, do take the opportunity tomorrow to hear the second part of this talk. Tomorrow's talk starts at 4:30 p.m., would follow a similar format to what we had this evening. So please do take the opportunity. As Mukeshbhai had said, this human birth is rare, and the time that we are awake is rare, so we should use that time well. So I can't think of a better way to spend the Saturday afternoon tomorrow than hearing the nectar of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And Mukeshbhai will probably speak a bit from the Mahabharata as well. So do join us tomorrow. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you once again, Mukeshbhai, for the most inspiring, thought-provoking talk. Thank you to our musicians as always. Kiran Bhai is a true devotee of the Mandir. He never says no. And Harini Ben, Dipendra Bhai as well. So thank you all very much once again to the tech team who had to be early and set up so that we could have this streamed. Do travel safely, have a good evening, and I'd like to ask Kiran Bhai to conclude the evening with the Shantipat.
Dev Shantah Antariksham Shantah Prithvi Shantah Apah Shantah Aushadayah Shantah Vanaspatayah Shantih Vishvedeva Shantih Brahma Shantih Sarvam Shantih Shantireva Shanti Sama Shanti Redi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti